So I'm hopping onto the bandwagon of tier lists, and I'm gonna try and do a tier list for the Peglin orbs, in my opinion anyway, as to where I think they're going to show up. Because I think there are some that are just way too strong, like the egg. Like everyone knows the egg is the best orb in the game. Like you can't beat the egg. You can't upgrade it, doesn't matter. Can't throw it, doesn't matter. It's the best orb in the game. You can't convince me otherwise. I think the all or nothing. I think it's probably a B tier. For me, anyway, it's a B tier because in higher Crucible levels, if you don't have something like the Lucky Penny or something to allow yourself to get more crits on the board, it's generally just going to do nothing and you're just going to skip past it. When you can hit a crit, it's great, but it's not generally going to be the case. For the lightning orb, I'd say the lightning orb is a C tier. I the damage isn't good. It's targetable, which does mean you can hit like target some farther back ones. But I think the damage is just garbage on it. Like is the I think the base stats are 1-2 on it. I don't want to use that. And then the fact that it just adds more pegs being hit, I'd rather just have consistent high damage on my pegs rather than just have low damage pegs. Bob Orb, I'd say definitely S tier. Bomb builds are, in my opinion, by far the best, especially with the Sapper Sack. There's just so many relics in the game that synergize with bombs, and being the fact that it's zero damage means kind of nothing, because if you're hitting six pegs and six pegs to get a bomb plus one, so if you're hitting seven pegs at the absolute minimum seven pegs and you're getting two bombs, that's 100 damage. That's like 13 per hit to every single enemy on the board. It is a little bit slower, but like delayed damage, but between all the extra relics and everything, it's just S tier. Bold Orb, I think, is in the same boat. It has really high stats, and it has really high stats, and it can just hit everything on the ground only. I think it's generally okay that it can't hit stuff that are above, because most of them are pretty squishy anyway, and you're not running into that many. Most of the time you're running into stuff, it's gonna be on the ground anyway. The Bramball, I haven't used a ton. In my limited experience of it, I'd say it's a C tier because there are certainly scenarios where I would want to Bramball, like the Minotaur boss or some of the elite fights. They're pretty nice to just stun there for a bit, and it does make it a lot easier. It's just not that great, in my opinion. Like I could be wrong. I haven't used it that much. I'd love to know what you guys think about all my placements on the orbs down in the comments. I'd say concentrication is A. Having piercing, permanent piercing, especially higher Cruciball levels, like Cruciball 5 and above, where you're getting one refresh on the board, being able to just consistently get a refresh and have decent damage is pretty good. So I'd say it's definitely A tier. Critiball, I'd say, is A tier as well. If you're running a crit build, you're definitely going to want to have the Critiball. And it could also act identical to the refresh orb in most cases. Because if you, sorry, not in most cases, but if you have the relic that allows crits to also refresh the board, it's going to be pretty good. It basically acts like a refresh orb. And then on top of that, if you have the fleece, which is the linear damage scaling for every single crit you hit, it's gonna do some crazy damage. Dagorb, same boat as the extraordinary. I'd say the Darkness Eterball is a B tier orb, mainly because the blind is an interesting side effect. It can really help, and it can trivialize a lot of fights. But I also think that the stats are pretty low on it. They're like, I would rather have more specialized orbs for it. And the relics just do blind better. Like in most scenarios, if I'm gonna go for a blind build, I'd rather have good orbs with good blind relics rather than having the blind orb. So for that reason, I'd say it's B tier. It's not C tier because I do think it's better than these two, but it's not great. Docked Orb, I'd say is A tier. Having the ability to heal, especially if it's level 2, so you can just, it doesn't get removed from your deck anymore. I wouldn't say even level 3, because most of the time you're getting a full heal every time you're throwing it anyway. I'd say just having a full heal whenever you need it is super helpful, and it also allows you to take less heal after battles if you're struggling a bit, and just do upgrades and collecting more orbs if you want that. So for that reason, I'd say it's good. Ekorb, D tier. I've used it very, very little. The only time Ekorb is viable is if you're gonna have so much damage the previous shot that you're basically already done the fight anyway. Like, it doesn't matter. Sure, it can work, because, like, say you're doing, I think it's like like, even if it's 50%, which is what the Orboros is, I do 1,000 damage to an enemy. It's doing like maybe 700 because its stats are so low, and you can't upgrade the stats because you're upgrading the echo on it, not the stats. So it's reliant on the previous shot, and I think that's just bad. I'd actually put the extraordinary in B tier as well, because I think it's very situational, but it's better than the other two because it doesn't require you to hit something, but it also it has worse stats because of it. I'd say it's probably it's just better situational Dagorb and Extraordinary. I actually think I'd put Dagorb above the Extraordinary because most of the time I can shoot a 1-7, I can't shoot a 0-10 most of the time. Icicle, A tier. Actually, I think Icicle is probably I'd say Icicle is S tier. It has piercing, like the concentrication, which I put in A tier. It has good damage, and it also has piercing shots and AoE shots. Especially if you hit a crit, it's going through everything. It's definitely up there. I'd say Bold Orb and Icicle are definitely the two AoE orbs that I would go for most of the time. Inferno Orb, I used to actually think was pretty like mediocre, but then I did my pain synergy, and now I'm like, you know what? I think it's pretty good because yeah, you're trading off 2 damage to yourself, but 2 damage is pretty minimal, and the stats on this thing are wild. The stats are really, really good just from the start. If I'm not mistaken, anyway, I could be like looking through a pair of rose glasses because I was getting double damage from the Wand of Skultimate Power. But I would say that it's the stats and the ability to just one-shot bombs if you don't have the short fuse is pretty good. Matryoshka, I'm actually going to put Matryoshka in B. Yeah, you get a lot of orbs, but they're 1-2. You need relics to support the Matryoshka, so it's really situational. A lot like these. I would say it's better than the crit orbs, but worse than the extraordinary for sure. Because like it's good on its own. It can support itself, but it doesn't actually shine unless you have a build to support it that gives it like that extra oomph. Because a 1-2 orb, sure you're getting like 6 of them, and you're hitting a lot of pegs, but at a certain point, you're just getting so many orbs on the field that are just basically doing nothing. So, I don't like that. I think the Mem Orb, I'd probably put down here with the Ek Orb, above the Ek Orb, because you can't shoot it early, or it's just going to do garbage damage. And if you're shooting it late, most of the time you're already done by the time it gets to decent damage on the Mem Orb, you're kind of already done. Like, you're hitting so many pegs by that point, you'd had to have been shooting, like, a ton of just Matryoshkas. Like, it just seems bad to me. I can't really rank this because it's kind of everything. The Mirror Orb, yeah, it's just kind of everything. It's not, it's, I guess, I guess maybe B tier because the average of everything, and generally when you're getting it, you do have a more specialized build, so it's only really going, it's only adding a duplicate of one of the orbs that you want in your deck anyway. Uh, Actually, for that reason, I think it's probably an A tier. It's not S because you can't guarantee what orb you're gonna get. At least not to my knowledge, but I'm pretty sure you can't. Um, but it's definitely I'd say because you're kind of only getting it in a build that you already want, it's probably up there. Morbid Orb, I'd say A tier. For the stats are kind of low on it, but it kind of hits every peg multiple times, and it does make the less full pegboards a lot better. I'd say it's definitely there. This one I would say is D tier, because it has the piercing effect of the concentrication, but I never want to take this thing because if I'm going to try and use the piercing effect from the concentrication, it not only breaks down all the walls, but it also doesn't get stopped by random things in the way. This basically has extra walls, and it's just not good. Nosfor Batu, I think is actually a better Docked Orb. I think Nosfor Batu, I think it's an S tier. I think Nosfor Batu is an S tier item. Yeah, you're taking self damage, but it's generally, again, why I think this one's, you don't need above level 2 for this one. You're getting a full heal on it anyway most of the time, and the 15 health, yeah, it can kill you, but I think the ability to have it persisting through fights so that you can maybe, it supports self damage builds, it supports healing builds, it supports it's good AoE too, because like say I'm 50 health, I'm doing 100 health on healing to everything. That's pretty good. This is an all-in orb. It's what, the Omega Orb. It's really good as like a last ditch effort because if you're shooting it early, you're kind of screwing yourself. I actually think it's a C tier. I think it's above. I think it's above Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning is just bad. Brand Ball is just bad, but it's not. I don't think it compares to them. I'd say Oh My Gorb. You're basically throwing this out at the end or like in AoE fights where you don't need too much health. It's a lot of damage too. So I do think it's kind of mid A tier. The Oh My Gorb being able to just AoE everything is pretty good. The Orbalisk. I think Orbalisk is an A tier. It does insane damage when you have the support for it, which is just a bunch of stones. And you can get a bunch of stones pretty easy, I think. So yeah, I'd say this is probably like mid A tier, probably up with this. It just does a ton of single target. Orboros is definitely S tier. It's got incredible stats. You're granted, if you get it late, you're not going to want to do it. But if you get it early, it is a run shaper because you not only get rid of all the bad orbs you don't want, you get an amazing orb, and you can just, in the future, you can just get what you want, and you can really shape your deck because I think the event is really good early on, and then the orb you get on top of it, it has Echo 50 and Persist 5, so every single shot, you're kind of building off after the last one. It is what Ekorb wishes it could be. And it has good stats to back it up. And I think that's what separates D tier Ekorb to S tier uh, Orboros. I'd say this is a C tier. Unlike the Bold Orb, which is its dense counterpart, sure it's hitting pegs 3 times, but I think it suffers a lot from the same fate that the Ball Lightning does, in the sense that it's just hitting pegs for low damage, and it's also dense, so you can't really shoot it as far as the things. And I think it kind of works. It's okay on the boulder because it does so much damage most of the time that it's fine. I think for this, it's just worse though. It's just worse Bold Orb. And the fact that it's single target and can't ever be more than that, to me, it makes it C tier. Like, it's better than these, but I wouldn't take it over anything else. So the stone is a B tier. This has a lot of support to it and it's decent stats, and you can really shape a build around it with the Suffer the Sling relic on top of the Orbalisks. So you can definitely shape a build around it, so it's kind of situational, but it's definitely just not... It's not as good as some of the A or S tier relics. Bolt Orbgeist, I'd put in B tier. It's a lot like the Icicle and the Bold Orb in the fact that it has AoE. The difference being this stats suck at the ability to hit everything instead of just one row. Like, the Icicle, why I like it a lot more is because it has higher stats, meaning it can actually kill stuff, at the cost of not being able to hit up and down at the same time, but that doesn't really matter most of the time, because most of the time, you're not going to encounter that. So it's probably a B tier for me. Refresh Orb. I'd say Refresh Orb is a B tier because I'd rather have other... most of the time, I'm discarding this just to get the free refresh immediately. But I'd rather also just have a build that can go around... I don't know. It's either A... It's high B or low A for me. Because I'm not shooting it, I'm discarding this relic, but it is a guaranteed refresh. But sometimes I also don't want a refresh. I don't know, it's probably... I'd say it's mid B tier, actually. High B tier. High B tier. Reorbanizer, definitely C tier for me. It's low stats. It can get you out of pickle if you don't have any of the things that allow you to guarantee refreshes later on in Cruciball. But most of the time, you're going to have something that's going to let you do that. So it's just not worth taking. I'd say the stats on the Rub Orb are pretty good, and it's just fun to watch bounce around. I'd say it's an A tier. It's just good stats, and it's just good amount of peg hitting. So it's probably A tier. I'd say Sphere, probably A tier as well. It's got decent stats. Not as much as the Icicle, and it also doesn't guarantee if I get a crit to go through everything. It does go through 3, and it is AoE, but I think the Icicle stats are better than the Sphere stat, so it's just a good AoE orb. It's not quite as bad as that. Splat Orb, probably... I'd say Splat Orb is like mid B tier. Rubbering orbs to make them durable, kind of cool. Make them rubbery, kind of cool. But I think there's other stuff I'd rather have over it. And then the Swarb, it's just good. It's just stats. There's nothing about it that makes it special. It's just stats. It's decent stats. It's probably B tier. It's average. Like, I'd take it over a stone. It's okay. I'd say this is probably the counterpart to Omega Orb, the Swolt Orb, to upgrade your pegs. If you're doing, like, some shenanigans with it, like, you can go with the Glorious Suffering, too. You can get some pretty high damage numbers on this thing. I think it's probably B tier. I don't think it's A tier at all, but it's probably B tier. Yeah, I'd say it's around B tier. So this is my final tier list. I'd love to know what you guys think about what I came up with. And if you guys want to see the tier list of the relics, I'd also love to know about that. But if you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. My Discord's down in the description if you're interested. And anyway, see ya.